Good evening, everyone. Welcome to a People for Effective Government online event. We are really glad to have you. Thank you for joining us. My name is Jenny Darrell, and this is our first online event on behalf of PEG. So if we have any difficulties, hoping not, but if we do, just ask your forbearance as we work through them. PEG is a nonprofit Spokane-based nonpartisan coalition. Our mission is to support bipartisan approaches to governing, which are fiscally responsible, ensure an adequate social safety net, and promote a civil society. The members of PEG are committed to changing the current political climate in which our two major parties have become increasingly polarized. We're working to encourage sincere and civil debate about the challenges that our nation faces and about effective solutions to those challenges. If you're interested in learning more about PEG and possibly becoming a member, please visit our website at www.pegnow.org. The views presented by our guest speakers, whether it's this interview or in-person forums, are their own. As a 501c3 nonprofit, PEG neither participates in political campaigns on behalf of or in opposition to any candidate for public office, nor engages in political activity of any kind. Tonight, our speaker will give us a brief presentation on his background, after which Eric Coltrane and I will have some preliminary questions for him. This will be followed by questions from the audience. It's our policy to ask the audience to be brief with their questions and only ask one question at a time. It's best if your questions are only 2 to 3 sentences long. Please submit your questions via the chat box feature. Near the end of the interview, we'll also welcome your comments on this interview. But to help us work through the audience questions and not be confused by a lot of information, please hold your comments until towards the end. Our speaker tonight is Mr. Chris Vance. He has been a Washington state leader in politics and public policy for over 25 years. Chris spent 2 terms in the Washington State House of Representatives before becoming the youngest person ever elected to the King County Council. After 8 years on the council, he was elected chairman of the Washington State Republican Party. Since leaving the chairmanship in 2006, Chris has worked as a public affairs consultant, served as a senior advisor to the state superintendent of public instruction, and now serves as communication and external affairs manager in the King County Assessor's Office. He also teaches part-time as an adjunct professor at the University of Washington Evans School of Public Policy and Governance, teaching graduate-level public affairs. He is a frequent political commentary in Seattle media outlets. Seattle Magazine has twice named him to its list of Seattle's most influential people. Chris Vance and his wife, Anne Marie, have 2 grown children. They live in Sumner, Washington. Mr. Vance, thank you very much for joining us tonight. Please tell us more about your background.
Okay, well, I'm going to thank you for having me. Thank you for the mission you've undertaken. I think it's really critical right now. It's what more Americans need to be talking about is the most basic questions, which is how do we fix our political system, which is clearly dysfunctional. What I'm going to talk about for a few minutes is my journey from being about the most loyal Republican in the state to where I am today, where I'm supporting Joe Biden for president. And I think it's illustrative of the phenomenon of millions of Americans, especially hundreds of thousands of really politically active Americans who found themselves without a party and went looking for something new. So I was the Republican nominee for the United States Senate in 2016 against Patty Murray. Which we believed we have a competitive chance to win that election when I began the race, because Barack Obama's approval ratings were not very strong. And after 8 years of a Democrat in the White House, people would be looking for something different. And Donald Trump became the defining voice and face of the Republican Party, which just changed everything. And I began telling my fellow Republicans in about February or March that if he becomes the nominee, I'm not going to vote for him. And running for the US Senate, I have to tell people that. I mean, if you remember Bill Bryant running for governor, the only question he ever got asked was, do you support Donald Trump? So the day after he won the Indiana primary, I had a press conference in Seattle that got a lot of attention saying I would not vote for my party's nominee for president. My campaign was already dead at that point. No Republican was going to get elected in Washington State with Donald Trump at the top of the ticket, but it became double dead after that. Money stopped, people stopped talking to me, people stopped, well, Democrats love me, but the party just abandoned me because the party from the very beginning was all in for Trump. And the assumption then from a lot of us was, all right, this guy is going to lose. And then after he loses, we can clean up the mess and rebuild the party and bring it back towards some semblance of sanity. And he won, changed everything. And a lot of people, a lot of folks who were never Trumpers scattered. When the shock wore off, a few different directions emerged. Bill Kristol and a lot of other never Trump Republicans started pursuing the path of trying to redeem the party by trying to recruit a high-profile person to run against Donald Trump in 2016 and take the party back. So they worked really hard on trying to recruit John Kasich to run for president, and Larry Hogan and others, and failed. And that effort didn't really go very far. Others of us, including myself, started to pursue a different path, saying we need a new political movement in this country of people who are not comfortable with either party, are more centrist and moderate. And so what we need to do is elect independents to public office and elect enough of them to make a difference at every level. And eventually that would become de facto the third major party. So I got very active in an organization called Unite America, along with Congressman Brian Baird, Democrat from Washington State. We went nationally and locally, raised money and recruited candidates trying to elect independents to office in 2018. At the same time, you had Howard Schultz. Remember that? Howard Schultz announcing that he's going to run for president as an independent, a centrist independent. And a lot of ex-Republicans, including a lot of the consultants who are now running the new Lincoln Project, were part of the Schultz campaign, which didn't go very far. So two things happened with that movement. First of all, Howard Schultz flamed out. And second, we did everything we set out to do. We recruited hundreds of independent candidates around the country for everything from the legislature to the US Senate, governor, funded them, got them professional help. We created the infrastructure of a party, and they all lost. And they didn't just lose, they got creamed. You had situations like in Kansas, where there was a Republican named Chris Kobach, who's super unpopular, crazy guy, could not win, and a Democrat. I mean, Kansas could not elect a Democrat, and our candidate was a very well-known business person who had run before, had tons of money, tons of name ID. We thought this guy can win. He got like 5% of the vote. We found from the election results in our polling that as much as people hate the two parties, they're not willing to vote for an independent, at least not an organized slate of independents. Maybe if some rich person with a ton of built-in name ID chose to run as an independent, that might work, but just recruiting people to run as independents just doesn't work, because people are scared to death that if I vote for your independent, the party I hate is going to get elected. I may not even like the Republicans that much, but I really hate the Democrats, so I cannot waste a vote on independents. So that movement died. Unite America voted to go in the direction of pursuing electoral reform rather than electing independents. And that's where still a lot of people are, is thinking we need ranked choice voting. We need end of gerrymandering. We need electoral reforms to the system to save us. And a lot of people who are active in the movement went that way. At the same time, the people who are trying to save the party, the Never Trumpers, began to realize that there was no saving it. because the Republican base loves Donald Trump and is not interested in moving in a different direction. And they would never support an establishment moderate like a Jeb Bush or John Kasich again. And grudgingly, slowly, those people began to realize that you're not going to redeem the Republican Party, at least in the foreseeable future. So that brings us to about early this year. There was a meeting in Washington, D.C., in fact, two meetings, of the Never Trump movement leaders, Evan McMullin and folks you see around the Lincoln Project, and a lot of columnists who write the New York Times and the Washington Post, Max Boot, Tom Nichols, Peter Wehner, a bunch of very prominent people met in Washington, D.C. to talk about where do we go from here. And the conventional wisdom at the time was that Bernie Sanders was going to be the nominee of the Democratic Party. And we all agreed that we couldn't support Bernie Sanders. We didn't like Trump, but we could not go as far as supporting a Democratic Socialist. And so that if Bernie Sanders was going to prevail and take the Democratic Party way to the left, those of us in this room were going to need to be the nucleus of really getting, for real, create a centrist third party. Probably not for 2020, but moving forward. Because the Democratic Party is lost, it's going to move way to the left. The Republican Party is Trumpified. But we also agreed that if in the unlikely event that Joe Biden became the Democratic nominee, well, that changed everything. That, well, okay, so if the Democrats are going to be a relatively centrist party led by somebody like the former vice president, we could get on board with that. And it was pretty much unanimity in the room that if Biden was the nominee, we would all, at least for 2020, become Democrats and help Biden and all the Democrats. Because right now, the purpose and everything that matters is to defeat Donald Trump and those who enable him. And lo and behold, that's what's happened. And so I would say, to wrap this up, as where we are today is the people around the Never Trump centrist alternative movement is really coalescing around the idea that the Democratic Party can be redeemed. There's still a chance that you can hold it as a relative centrist party, especially if a lot of former Republicans, moderate former Republicans, move into the Democratic Party to influence it, to help it fight off the Bernie Sanders AOC socialist wing of the party. And that if that's going to be the future, we don't need another party. But let's see. I mean, everything can be changed. You know, elections change things. What happens if Trump actually wins? I mean, I think if the election were held today, Donald Trump would lose, and it would not be close. But things can change between now and November. What happens if the Democrats do go crashing off to the left? So for today, the energy is behind beating Trump and then probably becoming Democrats. And that's where I am personally. I've got a Joe Biden sign in my front yard. I'm looking forward to being part of Republicans for Biden. You may see my name on a ballot someday with a D next to it. So, and thanks for having me, and I'll answer any questions you have.
Appreciate the background, Chris. I think you've answered 3 or 4 of my first questions already, so I appreciate that. So I wanted to start with some questions about the possibility of a third centrist party. And you've sort of already answered this. So in your view, there's nothing fundamentally problematic about a two-party system.
The two-party system has served us well throughout most of our history, but that's because of a couple of things. First of all, throughout most of our history, one party or the other was able to win decisively and govern. If you look at it, at every point in our history, let's just start from the Civil War forward, the Republicans for decades had big majorities. They could actually get things done and govern and enact policies. And then with the realignment of FDR and the Depression, the Democrats for decades had really total control of the American government, and they're able to govern. But recently, since Reagan, we've had very close elections. America is very closely divided into two parties, so neither side wins the election. I mean, to really govern this country, you've got to elect a president and a solid majority in the House and over 60 seats in the Senate to avoid a filibuster. And neither party can do that. So in that way, the two-party system is failing us. The other thing is political scientists used to talk about how boring our parties were because they were both relatively centrist, both supported, for instance, capitalism. We were one of the rare democracies that didn't have an overtly socialist party, and the Republicans and Democrats weren't that far apart. Longer true. In every scale, Republicans and Democrats are miles apart and can't work with each other. So for all those reasons, our two-party system recently has been a disaster. And I've written about it and talked about it. But if you read what I've talked about, it's always like the Democrats are going to become this left-wing radicalized party and the Republicans, but Joe Biden and a lot of other Democrats are from the old school where there wasn't that big a difference between R's and D's. So if that moderate wing of the Democratic Party is going to be the governing wing of the Democratic Party, there's no room or need for a third party. But we'll see. We'll see what happens.
So do you think it's possible that the Democrats could, or one side or the other, could gain a governable majority? I mean, what we've seen in the past is, major legislation, and then it's just reversed by the next party that comes in. Do you think it's possible in today's climate?
Yes, I think, as I said, and I've been doing campaigns, getting paid to do campaigns for a long time. Polls are accurate, okay? The problem is most people don't know how to read them. And if you read all the polling data today, if the election were today, you would end up with a Democratic president, big majority of Democrats in the House, and a Democratic majority in the Senate. And then I think you could see the Democrats coalesce around Biden's agenda and move things forward. I think that is very possible as a result of this election. But there is definitely an ongoing war within the Democratic Party. There is an organized faction in their party, which is the Democratic Socialists. They have their own PAC called Justice Democrats. They run their own candidates. And our state's interesting because the chair of the Progressive Caucus among the House Democrats is the left-wing party, the left-wing faction, is Pramila Jayapal from Seattle. The chair of the moderate Democrats, called the New Democrat Caucus, is Derek Kilmer from Tacoma. And you really see that. I mean, you look at most of the Democrats in the history of Washington State, they're pretty moderate. Patty Murray and stuff is not a crazy liberal. But Pramila Jayapal does not fit that mold, and you're seeing more and more Democrats that way. So much depends upon the war within the Democratic Party. But Biden's win is pretty damn convincing. I mean, he after except for a couple of states like Nevada and Iowa, he crushed Sanders. It wasn't close.
No. So whether or not that that governable majority materializes, do you think, though, that a multi-party system could achieve legislative or policy outcomes that better reflect a modern ideal, or is it just, I don't know. What are your thoughts on that?
There is no reason why we only have two parties. I mean, our system is sort of predisposed to that because of the winner-take-all, first-past-the-post, single-member district type system we have. But the British have the same system. Winner take all, you get elected with a plurality, not a majority. There's no ranked choice voting. And they've never had just two parties. Of course, it's a parliamentary system, but really, that doesn't really matter. I mean, there is absolutely no reason why you couldn't have 40 or 50 or 100 members of the United States House of Representatives be of a third party. And they'd have to put together coalitions and stuff. There's no need for that. There's no reason that can't work. But there has to be a desire for that. And I think that desire would have been there if Bernie Sanders had been the nominee. I mean, there are a ton of people out there like me who would never vote for Donald Trump, but never vote for a guy who's going to like socialize our healthcare system. But Sanders didn't become the nominee. So for right now, that whole idea is kind of on the shelf.
So you talked about your experiences with the PAC, Washington Independence and Unite America. And I wasn't aware of this polling. So the polling shows that it's not that they don't like the independent candidate, it's that they're afraid the party they hate will win.
Yep.
What do you do about it? What can moderates or centrists or independents do about that? Or what can be done?
Well, I would encourage moderates and centrists, if they can, live with the things that the Vice President Biden is saying, go be a Democrat and support him and support Democrats who support him and oppose the far left, at least for now. But if you were going to create a third party, the only way to do it is if, first of all, the two parties have created a giant gulf in the center, which I think, again, Sanders would have done. And then you've got to brand it. This is the big mistake that our movement made, and I yelled and screamed literally in some meetings and about the independent movement, and it's still out there. You still have people, there's something called the Alliance Party, where they tried to pull together all the tiny little parties that are out there around America, like the modern Whigs and stuff, and create a third party. There's something in California now called the Common Sense Party. There's an actual independent party in Oregon. But the great weakness of all of that is they refuse to adopt a platform. They refuse to be specific about where they stand on issues. Their message is, and our message was in 2018 with Unite America, the two parties are terrible, the system is broken, vote for us because we ain't them. And we're gonna, if anything, we would support, reforms to our system, like well, the people, that's very nice, but where are you on abortion? What do you think about guns? What are you gonna do about my health care? What's your position on education? And the independent reform type movement had no answers for that on purpose, because they wanted to be everything to everyone and have everyone feel comfortable in their movement. And voters are like, I don't know what. So if you're ever going to have a third party, it has to be a centrist third party that takes specific stands on issues. And as I talk about, a one nation party that talks that has specifics about how it's going to reform everything, not just make it easier for people to register to vote.
Yeah, and we're going to talk, Jenny's going to ask you some questions about a one nation party or one nationism. So this is a good, I've listened to debates in centrist circles about the best way to build or grow a third centrist party. Now, some people say if the candidates will just come, if somebody like a Romney or a Kasich or somebody will just come, the people will flock, the fans of that candidate would flock to a centrist party, and that would essentially kick it off. Others believe that it has to be built at the state and local level, and that would attract quality of candidates. I'm not sure what happened to me. I don't know when the last major realignment was, probably the Whigs and Lincoln, right? So I don't know which was first, maybe you do, but, and what's your view on that?
So I've done a little bit of research about this. It's not very difficult. There have been 8 major political parties formed in American history. And by the way, those of us today here on this meeting, we could snap our fingers, call ourselves a party, and we're a party, okay? It's easy to create a minor party. That's a waste of time. Who cares? Okay, when was the last time libertarians or the Greens would ever actually won an election? The only thing that interests me is creating a major party that can win, elect a president, elect governors and senators. There have been 8 of those in American history. Every one of them has been formed from the top down by a group of professional politicians who got together in a room and said, we need a new party, usually organized around a presidential candidate. Thomas Jefferson created a new party. Andrew Jackson created a new party. The Whigs were a new party. Lincoln and the Republicans, on and on and on. Teddy Roosevelt created a new party in 1912 that persisted for a while and elected a bunch of people. A bunch of bull moosers got elected to the Washington legislature. That's how it would have to happen. And again, not being a broken record, I think it could have happened if the Democrats had nominated Bernie Sanders. That would have been a tectonic shock to our system, a bolt of lightning you would need to get people to get serious about creating a new system. But I don't believe you're going to just get a bunch of activists at the local level who eventually build up a party that can compete with the major parties. It's going to have to come from the national level down.
Yeah. And it sounds like the people you talk with, and you're in tune with the major Never Trump Republicans, they're pretty much content on fighting it out in the Democratic Party right now. Is there any group that's really with any clout that's really trying to do anything behind the scenes to do a third party after the election?
Not now. There would have been.
No.
Again, I was in the room with a bunch of people who were going to be committed to doing that if Sanders had been the nominee. I keep coming back to that, and we're going to look back, and the South Carolina primary is going to be a pivotal moment in American history. Right now, everybody in our movement is focused on beating Donald Trump and beating Republicans. And then there's some disagreement over what comes next. There are some people who will say, well, then we need to go back and try and redeem the Republican Party. And then others are like, no, we need to go be Democrats. But for right now, it's beat Donald Trump. And right now, there's no serious discussion about forming a third thing. But it's fluid. This is so fluid. I mean, what happens if Trump wins? I think that blows everything up again.
Yeah, I'm going to come back to that. What happens next? I'm going to move on to the current election cycle. You brought it up as well. So obviously the 2020 elections are the Never Trump movement's primary concern right now. And so you are a senior advisor to a group, or is it a PAC, called the Lincoln Project? And it's getting a lot.
It's a PAC.
It's a PAC. And it's getting a lot of attention right now. So can you describe your involvement with that group?
Yeah. So this is a bunch of very high-level Republican consultants, some of the best consultants in the Republican Party. John Weaver, who worked for McCain and Kasich. Steve Schmidt, who ran the McCain campaign, and several others. Reed Galen, who worked for George W. Bush. Jennifer Horn, who is the chair of the New Hampshire Republican Party. Mike Madrid, one of the biggest Republican consultants in California. It's a bunch of Republican campaign consultants who just said, okay, we can't fix the Republican Party. We need to be a kamikaze mission to just blow it up, burn it down, destroy the Republican Party in 2020, beat Trump, and attack the senators, especially, who support him. And they've been able to raise a decent amount of money. They've been running ads both just online and in targeted states. And they are getting a ton of attention. They got Trump's attention recently. And it is going to be an effort to really try and influence the election. And they are going to do the stuff in politics that people love to hate, which is really vicious negative ads. They are good. They operate under the idea, and I think they're pretty much right. Okay, Democrats are better than Republicans at some things, but Republicans produce better consultants, better strat, and run tougher ads, and know how to go for the jugular. And these guys despise Donald Trump, and they are going to pull no punches in going after him. And Republican senators like Martha McSally in Arizona, Tom Tillis in North Carolina, Susan Collins in Maine. And so they formed this thing. And then they contacted a bunch of second ring people like me, said, you know, we can't, it can't just be us. It can't just be a handful of political hacks. Will you serve as a senior advisor? So it's basically like a steering committee. So that's my job now, is help with a lot of other voices, give them overall strategic advice. They just announced yesterday they're going to form some kind of grassroots organization called Republicans for Biden that I anticipate I'm going to be part of. But they are one of many groups. You have Bill Kristol and Sarah Longworth have formed something called Republicans for the Rule of Law, which is also running ads out there. the difference in the two is the Lincoln Project guys are not just going after Trump, they're going after any and all Republicans and the party itself, where Crystal's group is more just Trump-centric. He still hopes that the party can be brought back at some point. And then you also have Evan McMullen's organization called Stand Up Republican, which is doing things. So there's at least 3 groups out there raising money, doing stuff, and as part of the Never Trump movement now in the 2020 election.
Yeah, I've seen some of the ads. They are really intense, really intense. So
these guys are vicious.
Yes, yeah. So Rick Wilson, he's a part of the group as well?
Rick Wilson is the most vicious.
Yeah, yeah. So is the goal with that to get converts or to energize Never Trump voters, or is it something else? I mean, I know they raised over $1 million in a day recently. So.
I don't want to give away the strategy to the other side, but there really are no secrets in politics. Their operating assumption is that there's a ton of Republicans, soft Republicans, former moderate Republicans, who have reluctantly supported Trump and are ashamed of it. They know what he is. They know he's a terrible person. They know he's doing terrible things to America. And the Lincoln Project's mission is to shame them, to just shove it right in their face at how terrible Trump is, with an implied message of, you know better, you know what he is, shame on you for supporting him. And that is what they're trying to do. And they think they think there's polling data that it will move people. And I think they're probably right. There is some truth to this. These Republicans need to be told there's consequences for what you've done by supporting this guy. And at the Lincoln Project, that's their big thing, is go right at that hot button.
Got it. And so you mentioned that they're targeting all Republican senators. They're not, so they'd even target a Ben Sasse or a Mitt Romney if you're running. Or
probably not Romney right now. He's like the only Republican that we can stomach right now. But if they're going after the senators who are in vulnerable races, they want to deny the Republicans a majority in the Senate. So Sasse is safe. If he wasn't, they'd be going after him. They're going after the target races.
Got it. And is Lincoln Project in contact with the Biden team, or I don't know the rules on that? Yeah.
They have to be very careful because they are a PAC doing independent expenditures. But there are conversations between our movement and the Biden campaign. Mm-hmm. One of the Daily Beast or had an article over the weekend talking about how the Biden campaign is working on creating a Republican for Biden type thing. There's a lot of that going on behind the scenes. But the Lincoln Project specifically has to be careful because they are an independent expenditure group.
Got it. So, and you've alluded to this a little bit. So what do you think the group does next, right? So if Trump loses, what happens? If Trump wins, what happens? So if he wins, I mean, so I don't know, what are your thoughts on that? Or is there a consensus on what to do?
If Trump loses, I think our tribe, Never Trump, independent, whatever, will split into 2 groups. People who think, okay, let's go join the Biden administration, join the moderate Democrats. And then there are those who will try and go back and fight the battle to redeem the Republican Party. You know, maybe John Kasich runs for president again. You know, I mean, if Trump wins or loses, the day after the election in November, the race to redefine the Republican Party begins. I think our movement, right now it's together, one thing, beat Trump. After the election, I think it'll probably splinter if Trump loses. If Trump wins, man, I don't know. I mean, people might just leave, go to Canada, go to Australia. And I'm facetious, but I think you'll see more of the really sad thing I've seen, which is a ton of my old friends, people who I fought in the trenches next to, for the Republican Party. After Trump won, they just hung it up. They're out of politics. They're making money, enjoying their lives, raising their kids. They're out. They're just out. And I think you're going to see a lot of that. If Trump wins, then there's no hope of bringing the party back. I don't think there is anyway, but if Donald Trump is elected, he's going to choose which of his kids is the next Republican nominee. You know, is it Donald Trump Jr. or Ivanka? And if Trump wins, everything in the Republican Party is going to be measured on how loyal you are to the dear leader. And in that atmosphere, and then in the Democratic Party, you can imagine if the most supposedly electable moderate can't beat Donald Trump, I think it just emboldens the Sanders socialist wing of their party. And maybe then you do see movement towards a third party, but I think there'd be so much depression. I think just think so many Americans will just give up on politics completely. Trump winning again would be a very dark future for this country.
And probably, likely, if you won, there wouldn't be a governable majority, and so we'd just be in this no man's land.
Yeah, well, it's hard. Elections usually go together. I mean, people win or lose up and down the ticket. I get so frustrated with people who don't understand politics. I'll say, Republicans are going to lose a bunch of seats in the legislature this year. Why? Because Trump. Oh no, everybody's people judge candidates individually. No, they don't. I mean, all politics now are national, and our politics have become tribalized, and people vote straight party tickets. And so, if Trump is getting reelected, that means Republicans somehow have rebounded, and you probably see the Republicans hold on to the majority in the Senate, which is terrifying given the age of some of the Supreme Court justices.
I really appreciate your time, Chris. I'm going to turn it over to Jenny, who's got some questions about your ideology and how it might play a role going forward in a centrist party, or maybe to help mold the Democratic Party. I appreciate it.
You bet.
Thanks, Eric. I appreciate that. Wow. Well, my first question was going to be about what you would propose for a platform for a third party, but I think you've kind of moved my question a little bit. So I'm going to refer to an article that you wrote last December in the Seattle Times.
Right.
And you listed kind of an outline of what a third party might have, and it's a very moderate, reasonable platform. Mm-hmm. So do you want to talk about that, or you want me to read it, or?
Well, I'll talk about it.
Okay.
First, there must be an ideology behind any movement, and it has to be specific. As I said, voters have this funny idea that they want to know what you're going to do if you get elected. And there is a governing philosophy that's always been in this country, but it did not have a name. Moderate is not specific enough. The British have a name for it, and it's called one nationism. It goes back to Disraeli, and there was always a movement within the British Conservative Party towards one nationism, and it's this idea. It is the idea that we need to be one nation, that we cannot promote class warfare coming from the left, and we cannot have a huge gulf between the rich and the poor because of laissez-faire business practices and just let the rich get incredibly rich. That we have to have capitalism, yes, and economic growth, but robust safety net programs to make sure that people who need help get help, so we can be one nation. And that philosophy, not all conservatives shared that philosophy, but it became a wing of the Tory party. And when you say one nation in Great Britain, everybody knows what it means. There's a debate in Great Britain of whether or not Boris Johnson is a one nation Tory or not. And that philosophy, which is, during the Industrial Revolution, the far left said, listen to Karl Marx, we need socialism, we need, workers' paradise, we need power to the workers and take money from the rich. At the same time, the bankers and the rich people said, no, government needs to stay out of that. We need to have, laissez-faire. And that's where the Republican Party was all the way up to Herbert Hoover, which is, that's not fair. If the Republican Party had listened to Teddy Roosevelt and become a progressive party rather than a laissez-faire party, the 1920s would have been very different. But it is the same philosophy that Franklin Roosevelt had. It's interesting, you look back, you think he was such a liberal, but he was a moderate in the Democratic Party. There were a lot of Democrats back then who were also communists. They belonged to both parties. He tried to reform capitalism in order to save it. So in a modern sense, that would mean fully funding Social Security and Medicare, unemployment benefits, a healthcare system that provides healthcare insurance for everyone, even private sector insurance, but make sure everyone is covered. Taking climate change seriously and working to promote a clean environment, respecting the civil rights of all Americans, having the idea that every American has the right to live their lives as they see fit and stop pandering to the far right on issues like transgender rights and marriage. So that is a philosophy, and it's a governing philosophy, and it has a name in Great Britain. I'd like to see that name attached to it here, because I just think it makes sense. We should be one America, rich, and not everybody's going to be as rich as their neighbor, but we're all have a chance in a one nation type system.
Okay.
And by the way, one more thing. If that all sounds familiar, that's pretty much been the governing philosophy of both our major parties in the old days. The Democrats weren't socialists. And after the Depression, the Republicans abandoned, pure laissez-faireism. Both parties were kind of one nation, but we're losing that today. I mean, it's gone in the Republican Party. And again, if the Democrats move way to the left, then it's gone there.
So on that note, I have a question. The labels socialist and socialism are often used, but not very well defined. And some say that serious progressive Democratic candidates are not actually proposing the elimination of the market economy or corporate profit or private ownership, but instead are calling for strengthening that social safety net in order to reduce the economic divide in our country. How do you view that statement?
Well, okay, so first of all, yeah, I mean, Republicans like to call every Democrat a socialist, okay? And that's not true. On the other hand, today's socialists call themselves socialists. I mean, because Thomas Sawant in the Seattle City Council is a socialist. Bernie Sanders is a socialist. AOC is a socialist because they say they are. They're not trying to hide it. They are. And if you go to the website for a PAC called Justice Democrats, this is the political action arm of the Democratic Socialist wing of the Democratic Party, and it lays out their platform. Now, some people will tell you that socialism means the government control of the means of production, where you nationalize all industries and stuff. Yeah, that would certainly be socialism. But I would say that if you're supporting the government taking over virtually all services, including healthcare, and you do want to nationalize some industries, which Bernie Sanders proposed, and massive taxes so that people have basically your income is limited. No more, millionaires taxes. We won't have millionaires and billionaires. That's pretty darn close to any academic definition of socialism. not Marxism. People need to, when people say when they're not socialists, what they mean is they're not communists. There's a big difference between socialism and communism. Most Western democracies have had and do have socialist parties. The British Labour Party, which is governed for much of post-World War II, was a democratic socialist party. Doesn't mean they took away people's freedoms and abolished democracy, but they massively raised taxes, massively expanded the role of government, nationalized industries. So again, I don't think for the Democratic Party has not been a socialist party. But there are now elements that want it to be a socialist party and are fighting for that. And they themselves call themselves socialists. So just to say, oh, they're not. Well, yeah, they are. Take them seriously.
Okay, I'm going to take a little bit.
And that's okay, by the way. I'm not impugning their patriotism. I just think they're wrong.
Okay. I'm going to take a little bit of a turn here. The pandemic has highlighted several vulnerabilities in our current social and economic networks, such as the lack of onshore manufacturing of everyday products, not to mention vital products like pharmaceuticals and personal protective equipment. It's also made us more aware, very aware, of the importance of investment in rigorous science. With this window into some of our weaknesses and dependencies, what opportunities do you see for a moderate political leadership or a third party?
Yeah, I think that obviously the pandemic has changed everything. That's such a truism that it's almost meaningless, and certainly changed politics. Now, what's to me fascinating is this could have reelected Donald Trump. People instinctively rally to the leader during a crisis. If he had listened to the scientists, listened to the doctors, could put out a consistent, calm, powerful message about this is a real deal, this is a terrible thing, we've got to deal with it, you would have seen his approval ratings go through the roof, just like the governor's ratings have gone through the roof all across the country. The fact that he has not done that has made, in my view, he was behind before. He was on track to lose before. He's really on track to lose now. And it's because of how he has handled the pandemic. I think that in the end, when there's a real crisis, people look for competence. And moderate government is usually much more competent and less ideology driven. So again, if Joe Biden is elected and can guide us out of this mess and do the things that need to be done, it's going to greatly bolster the strength of moderates in our government. And of course, what needs to be done, and Donald Trump's great failing, is this, like the Civil War, like World War I, like World War II, is a national crisis that can only be addressed from the top down, the massive federal effort to organize our economy and our manufacturing base and our entire public health system to do what needs to be done. And he won't do it. He will not do it. And so he's created this huge vacuum for the next president to come in and do that and really have a huge success and look like an incredible leader. And if that's a moderate like Joe Biden, it's going to help moderates across the board.
And you've talked a little bit about this. It feels like many of the pressing problems of our time have received token attention, and the problems are compounding. Mm-hmm. Collaboration in politics has morphed into enemies playing strategic enemy games, blame games. We're facing climate, you've mentioned this, we're facing climate change, growing economic disparity, a broken healthcare system, homelessness, failing infrastructure, goes on and on.
Yep.
So the current political parties are just not playing. They're not collaborating. So a moderate Democratic Party, a third party, what comments do you have on that?
So you're right. The gridlock right now is worse than it's ever been. I believe it began when you really started to see the rot settle into the Republican Party, which was roughly around 2010 with the advent of the Tea Party and the adoption of this attitude of anything Barack Obama says we're going to be opposed to. And by the way, and I lived through this, the Republican base by the end hated George W. Bush as much as they hated any Democrat. And they were determined to move the party in a more populist right-wing fashion. So the Democrats are not blameless in this. I think President Obama made a monstrous mistake by not embracing the findings of the Simpson-Bowles Commission, which he created to pass bipartisan efforts to do entitlement reform and bring down our debt. I mean, we're $24 trillion in debt and growing every day. And Obama should have moved to the center on that. I think he could have been viewed as a great president had he done that. But most of the blame is with the Republicans by just making politics war. And it didn't used to be. I mean, people forget George W. Bush was elected because he had this background as being an incredible bipartisan leader in Texas who could work with both parties. And look at his administration pre 9/11, where he worked with Democrats and Republicans to pass tax cuts and with people like Ted Kennedy to do major education reform. He expanded access to health care by putting a prescription drug benefit in Medicare. I mean, and he really was moving the Republican Party more to the center and collaborating with the Democrats. And then 9/11 happened and it changed everything. I mean, the focus became terrorism and war in Iraq and Katrina and everything else. So not that long ago, the two parties could work together. I mean, heck, I was on the King County Council when we had a 7-6 Republican majority back when we used to win races in the suburbs and a Democrat King County executive. So every single thing that happened in King County government had to be bipartisan. And it was. We didn't shut down the government. We met all of our growth management deadlines and we governed. It doesn't need to be this way. But it is right now because the Republicans have become so radicalized. I think like people like Nancy Pelosi would love to sit down and negotiate with serious Republicans and come to the center. They're not interested in doing that. The only thing that's going to break it up is one side or the other has to lose and lose big so that you have, the Democrats need to win this election by a wide enough margin that the Republicans are irrelevant. Just like, back in 1934 type thing. And then maybe then Republicans will figure it out that you can't keep doing this. But for the short term, our best hope is that the Democrats win this election big enough that they can then govern by themselves.
Okay, I'm going to take it a little bit bigger.
Mm-hmm.
Looking at global political changes, it seems there is an increasing movement towards autocracies.
Yes.
Why do you think so, and what can we do?
Okay, so I love that you've asked that question. Not enough people are focused on that. We live in scary times. Fascism is on the rise. Race-based ultranationalism is on the rise. You see more and more people saying, we want Germany for Germans, and the heck with Brexit, and Orban in Hungary has become a dictator, and across Eastern Europe, democracies are failing because there's two giant mega trends shaping the world right now. The first is vicious global competition for jobs. When my mom and dad were raising kids, America had no economic competitors after World War II. So American corporations could pay huge wages, give people health care. It was easy. Now, all across the world, you've got other countries, that make a washing machine, making shoes and clothes. So you see tremendous economic competition. And at the same time, you see massive increases in diversity. More and more countries are seeing more and more immigrants and people from other cultures they're not familiar with. And those two things together are toxic because you get people, particularly white people, saying these newcomers are here and they're taking our jobs. And it creates exactly what we're seeing, where immigration is hyper controversial everywhere. People closing their borders, and it's all race-based politics, and it's leading to instead of being loyal to the Constitution, being loyal to the concept of liberal democracy, I'm going to be loyal to my tribe. And that is exactly how fascism overwhelmed democracies in Italy and Japan and Germany and elsewhere in the 1930s. And that's where we are now, led by Vladimir Putin, who's the most dangerous man on the planet, that wants to reestablish not the Soviet Union, but Peter the Great's Russian Empire, and eventually wants to move against all the former Soviet republics on his border. And we have a president who doesn't understand that and instinctively trusts Putin more than he trusts NATO. So we live in very dangerous times. And, America shouldn't be the world's policeman. But, when there is no policeman, things get pretty ugly. And this world, we have been able to keep the peace and prevent World War III for over 70 years through American leadership around the world with a huge network of allies. Trump is undermining all of that, and that's helping to create this situation. So again, the best solution to all of this is going to be renewed American leadership. Somebody needs to tell Viktor Orban that if you're going to undermine democracy, you don't get to be part of the EU anymore, okay? And somebody needs to stand up to all of this, and it's not happening right now. Other than Angela Merkel, thank God, she's the leader of the free world.
Okay. So my last question is really just an opportunity for you to make a closing statement, I think, before we open it up to the audience's questions. And that was to restate that PEG's mission is to support these bipartisan approaches to governing: fiscal responsibility, social safety net, and a civil society. Do you have anything you want to add to that before we open it up to the audience?
No, your mission is the right one, and congratulations that you're pursuing it. For now, however, everybody wants the two parties to work together and get along and that's what should happen. And that's usually what's happened in America. But for today, right now, this minute, what matters is who wins in November of 2020. And that's really the only thing that matters. Everybody says every election is the most important. Well, I'll tell you, my view, this election is the most important election since 1860. It will be pivotal. It will be determinative. And if Donald Trump is reelected and the Republicans are reelected, I don't know what happens. The only way, in my view, we get to healing and sane government and effective government is if Donald Trump and his party is driven out of office. So I hope that happens. We don't have to worry about it in Washington State. The Republicans have zero chance of winning in Washington right now. In fact, they may lose more legislative seats in your county in Spokane because of this. But nationally, it's up in the air.
Wow. So I would encourage the audience to submit any questions you have for Chris in the chat feature.
Thanks, and I've been monitoring. We have a couple already. Thanks, Chris, for your thoughts. Really appreciate your time. So one person is asking about ranked choice voting. Ranked choice voting appears to be gaining momentum around the country. And even in Washington State, the local options bill gets more and more co-sponsors, I think, every time they try. And there are rumors there could actually be a ballot initiative in 2022.
Mhm.
So just overall, your thoughts on ranked choice voting and whether you like it and what positive changes might come about as a result of that, or negative.
I'm in favor of ranked choice voting. I'm in favor of ending gerrymandering. I'm in favor of getting rid of the Electoral College. I think we need to change the apportionment in the United States Senate so it actually reflects American population levels. There's a ton of stuff we need to do to our system to make it more fair. Now, in terms of ranked choice voting, it's controversial, but it is moving forward in many states. Many states. We tried it in this state in Pierce County a few years ago. The people of Pierce County hated it and voted it out. We'll see. It's confusing to a lot of people, so it's a difficult reform to enact. I'm for it, comma, but I don't think ranked choice voting or any of these types of reforms are going to ultimately save us, because even in places that have adopted ranked choice voting, they still just elect Republicans and Democrats. I mean, we live in a state that has most of the reforms that people want. I've been in some of these national meeting groups and meetings about reform, and they're, oh, you're from Washington. You guys have a top 2 primary and no party registration and mail-in ballots. You've got all this great stuff. And I go, yeah, and we still just elect Republicans and Democrats. So I don't think tinkering with the system is going to save us, but I'm still for it, you know. And you're right, there is a lot of momentum behind ranked choice voting.
Judy, were you going to ask the next one, or?
I have one, yes. I have a question from a gentleman who says, how do we fix our system? It's easy to tear down an idea. It's easier to tear down an idea than to promote a solution. It's easier to lie about another's position than to defend our own.
Right.
Big money has way too much weight in the debate. How do we fix the system so all of us can have an honest, fair debate with a fair vote?
That's another thing we haven't talked about. The campaign finance system in this country at the national level right now is a disgusting joke. I mean, there's in Washington, so you're running in Washington State, the amount of money you can take from any individual is limited, and independent expenditures have to truly be independent. The Public Disclosure Commission watches that carefully. But at the national level, the Federal Elections Commission is absolutely moribund. And you've got campaigns forming their own super PACs that are blatantly tied to their campaigns. They take massive donations from individuals and corporations and run billions of dollars worth of ads, and there's no regulation at all. It's outrageous. We've got to reform money in politics for sure. But again, that ain't going to happen if the Republicans win. And they're totally against that. So the only way you're going to get any changes like that is if the Democrats win in November. It keeps coming back to the same thing. Some people will say, fix the system, then you can win more elections. Well, you ain't going to fix the system if you don't elect the right people. So again, it comes back to if you want to change, you know, the system, you got to change the people with power in this country right now. I sound like Bernie Sanders on that, but
Yeah, we have another one here. Is the Lincoln Project working only at the federal level, or is it supporting moderate candidates against radical Republicans at the state level?
no, the Lincoln Project has one goal: destroy Donald Trump. And two goals: destroy Donald Trump and flip the U.S. Senate from Republican to Democrat. They're not involved in lower level races. They're not supporting moderates. They don't have an ideology. Okay, they want to destroy Donald Trump and help the Democrats take the U.S. Senate. Period.
Got it. Jenny?
Okay. Do you want to speak to the years of work that Republicans have done to further voter suppression? And what does the Lincoln Project propose to do to deal with alleviating voter suppression.
And don't confuse the Lincoln Project with a political party or a movement.
Okay.
They're a weapon. Okay, they're a howitzer. Okay, they are meant to inflict death and pain. Their job is to defeat Donald Trump and defeat Republicans for the U.S. Senate. They don't have a platform or any ideas. Okay, but you're right that in the old days, Republicans were concerned about voter fraud, legitimately concerned about voter fraud. Not anymore. Now it is morphed into blatant voter suppression because they aren't completely stupid and they know that they are losing overwhelmingly among non-white voters and young voters. In fact, the only people who are still reliably Republican are self-described white evangelical born-again Protestants and older white non-college educated men. Everyone else is voting for Democrats. And they know that as America becomes a majority minority country, that as more people of color, more people from the LGBT community vote, Republicans lose. So they are now blatantly doing everything they can to prevent that. And it's a relatively recent phenomenon. Again, I think a legitimate concern about voter fraud has morphed into just full-on voter suppression. And I think you're going to see, I think this election is going to be ugly. You're going to see lawsuits and litigation and fights, and the R's are going to do everything possible to prevent everyone they can from voting. And the Democrats will go to court, and it's going to be a bloodbath. But it's driven again by just a pure desire for power. And so they want to prevent their fellow Americans from being able to vote.
Good. So do you think, person asked, do you think that if all center-right and center-left independents join the Democratic Party, if they win, we could create the effective moderate government we crave? Or
yes.
Craves, yes.
That's the best path I see tonight. Ask me again in a month, but that's the best path I see. That a Joe Biden type party that is maybe a little more liberal than I would be comfortable with, but still a one nation centered party that can win big enough majorities to actually govern. That seems to me right now the path to national salvation. And it's what I'm working on right now.
Another question is, how do you feel about nationalizing education?
K through 12 education? No. First of all, you have to amend the Constitution. And I support state and local control of our schools. It's how we do schools in America. The federal government provides a relatively small amount of funding. But to have a national curriculum, to tell parents when they go to a school board meeting that we're using this textbook because the feds require us to, that's not how things work in America. People are not going to tolerate that. I mean, the federal government controls a lot and it's going to continue to control things, but we are still a diverse nation, and there's a different culture in Arkansas than there is in Washington State. And local control of our schools is sacred in America, and I don't see that changing at any time. And then now saying, I mean, I was the number 2 ranking Republican on the House Education Committee. I worked for 8 years for the Superintendent of Public Instruction. My wife is a special ed para-educator in the Auburn School District, works with kids with autism and Down syndrome. So my kids all went to public schools. I love our public schools. By the way, our public schools are a whole lot better than people think they are.
Good to know. Let's see, I got one via text message here. What is the best way to combat income inequality?
Grow the economy. Grow the economy. Create jobs, good paying jobs. Promote people getting the education they need. I mean, in this economy today, you need to have a college degree or advanced level technical training to do well. So enact policies that are going to provide access to all of those things. Continue to use the tax structure in a progressive fashion. I mean, I think we're going to have to, if we're ever going to bring down the debt, which we have to do, this cannot continue. We're $24 trillion in debt, and it grows continuously. It's going to get worse because of the pandemic. Social Security and Medicare, their trust funds will be broke in 15 years. We are going to have to ask the most affluent Americans to contribute more, not for new programs, okay? Not for socialized medicine, not for free college. We're going to have to ask the most affluent Americans to contribute more to bring down the debt, to stabilize Social Security and Medicare. And in so doing, that should help with income inequality. But we do have a huge problem in this country with income inequality, mostly centered around people in low education, low skill, service sector jobs. So there's always going to be the need for those jobs, but we need to work to get every American as possible up higher in the strata of the economy through education and training.
Okay, I have another one. What are your thoughts about term limits at the federal level and publicly financed campaigns based on a 90 or 180-day cycle, election cycle?
So I'll take the second one first. You know, I used to hate public funding of elections. Now I'm for it. Anything to change the system we have now. Anything to make challengers more competitive against entrenched incumbents. So I've come all the way around. I would support any form of public financed elections. So I'm for that. Term limits, not so much, because what you have, I mean, first of all, you have to amend the Constitution, and that just is not going to happen. And in some governments that I've seen, local governments and stuff that have term limits, what you have is just this cynical game where professional politicians in the courthouse go from one job to another. You know, you run for the council this year, I'm going to run for auditor, that sort of thing. And I think the American people should have the right to elect who they want. If you have a representative who's been in office a long time and you love them, you should have a right to reelect them. If we have a system where challengers can get the money to actually run a campaign to challenge an incumbent, we shouldn't need term limits. I beat a 4-term incumbent Democrat for my seat in the legislature in a district that had never elected a Republican. So I didn't need term limits. I went out and won the election. Term limits are a Republican idea that they promoted when they didn't believe they would ever get a majority in the U.S. House unless they got all the Democrats out. That's where the whole idea of term limits came from.
All right. So one person wants to know with the stay home order how you're getting your hair cut, and then I have a quick one of my own.
Oh, how do you know I've had my hair cut?
I don't know.
My wife ordered a set, the clippers and scissors, and she has cut my hair twice. She does okay, right?
Yeah, she does.
I'm 58 years old and I still have all this hair. I'm just considering myself lucky.
I have one. You have a lot of knowledge of Washington state politics. Do you want to handicap the race for governor this year, or talk about the legislative outlook for Republicans and Democrats?
So Washington has been a lean Democrat state since FDR, but Republicans were always competitive. We've won, we've elected. I wrote an article about this recently in crosscut.com. Republicans have won elections. Now that is impossible because it is mathematically impossible to get elected governor or U.S. senator unless you get 40% of the vote, at least in King County. You don't have to win King County if you're a Republican, you need 40%. Republicans now aren't getting anywhere close to that. And with Trump at the top of the ticket, there is just absolutely no way that a Republican is going to beat Jay Inslee. Then you add to that for the first time in a long time, the Republican Party does not have a really serious candidate for governor. I mean, Bill Bryant, the last candidate, great guy, had been a port commissioner. A lot of people knew him. He raised some decent money. Before that, you had Rob McKenna, the attorney general. I mean, Republicans haven't elected a governor, but we've had really good candidates. This time, you've got no one who has any statewide name familiarity other than Tim Eyman, which is hilarious. And I think Tim Eyman probably wins the Republican primary and ends up being the candidate against Jay Inslee, which is a disaster for Republican candidates. Because then if you are a Republican running in a vulnerable seat like Spokane's 6th legislative district, you have to answer the question, do you support the party of Trump and Eyman? And did you steal that chair, by the way? I mean, so I think that Republicans, there are 10 House seats that Republicans barely hung on to in 2018. I think all of those are in play, including in the 6th Leg District. And there is no chance that Republicans win any of the statewide races except Kim Wyman could hold on as Secretary of State, because we have a history of that, and people seem to think that Kim does a great job, which she does. So it's going to be a terrible, we are headed towards one-party rule in Washington State. In fact, if you read the article I wrote in Crosscut recently, the future in Washington is going to be like the current state of affairs in California, where the real contest is between the socialist Democrats versus the moderate Democrats, with the Republicans just over there on the side with a few seats left in the House or Senate. That's where we're headed. Because again, you can't, it is again, mathematically impossible to get a majority in the House or Senate unless you win a few seats in King County. There are not enough seats outside King County to get that done. And right now the Republicans have lost every district in King County, including the suburbs. They're just gone. There's no realistic chance of getting them back. So our politics is very boring in this state right now, but I think you're going to see greater and greater tension in the coming years between the moderate Democrats versus the far left Democrats.
I have one. How do you feel about comprehensive immigration reform?
I'm glad you asked that. We have got to pass what you just said, which is comprehensive immigration reform, which means comprehensive immigration reform. I mean, I've worked on this issue as a consultant, been active on this issue, which means we have real border security. Do everything everybody's been talking about to secure our borders. Nobody should enter this country illegally. At the same time, you create a path to legality for those who've been here for a long time, have put down roots, raising families, following the law. They should have a path to stay. Stop the deportation. Stop the spectacle of deporting parents when the kids are teenagers and they were born here, and stop the idea of deporting the dreamers. Give them a path to legality. Have a rational guest worker policy. That's comprehensive immigration reform. And guess what? That's what Ronald Reagan supported. That's what George Bush supported. That's what George Bush supported. That's what John McCain supported. And it passed, a bill like that passed the US Senate in 2013 with 14 Republican votes. But the far right killed it in the House. John Boehner wouldn't bring it up for a vote. A centrist party must support comprehensive immigration reform.
Would moderate Republicans, Lincoln Republicans, support constitutional changes to make it harder for demagogues? Example, all candidates must release taxes, strengthen Congress's ability to demand information that makes the president accountable, transparency laws.
Well, I would, but nobody who calls themselves a Republican is going to support that. Again, I think it's got to be former Republicans who have become Democrats or independents are going to support those things. It is really amazing, and it did not used to be this way. Again, I got into this business that first election I ever worked in was 1980. for Ronald Reagan. The base never blindly followed Reagan or Bush or Dole or McCain. They were critical sometimes. They fought back. Here, the Republican base now, whatever Trump says, they support. And if you are a Republican, you are judged on how loyal you are to Trump. So anything that is even remotely hinting at being disapproving to Donald Trump, they are going to oppose this year, next year, and into the future. So changes like that are going to have to come from the Democratic Party.
Beyond voting, what do you suggest the average citizen do to help create a more centrist, civil, effective government?
At the national level, because I can't comment on Spokane, but at the national level and maybe the state level, it's, vote for Democrats this year, write checks, give money, volunteer to go ring doorbells or make phone calls in targeted states, key states. We are not going to be a battleground, but when the time comes and the Biden campaign asks for people to go to Arizona and ring doorbells, do it. Go where the battle is and get engaged on the ground, and just continuously demand that your candidates are going to support these positions. Now, if you'd have asked me this in the past, I would have said, for instance, call, write, email, go to the town hall meetings to Kathy McMorris Rogers and tell her you want her to support moderate, reasonable policies, even if Trump doesn't. That's what I would have said 3 years ago. There's no point in that now. She won't. There's no hope of that. There's no hope of that she's going to do that. She's never going to deviate from Trump. None of them are. The ones who would have left Congress by now. And I would also, I would have said, okay, so go help Lisa Brown defeat Kathy McMorris Rogers. She didn't. And she's not going to lose this year. So I'm sorry for folks in Spokane. If you really want to influence this election, make donations to Joe Biden and go someplace, go to one of the battleground states and ring doorbells for Joe Biden. Sorry.
Yeah, this kind of piggybacks off your answer a couple of questions ago. You were talking about how everyone's just in lockstep. And this person asked about free trade agreements. It seems like the Republican Party has done an about face on that. And there is no disagreement anymore on free trade agreements. What is your opinion on free trade?
I'm a free trade nerd, okay? I am passionately in favor of free trade agreements. And Republicans were. I mean, think of what we're talking about. We're talking about government picking winners and losers, slapping huge taxes on products coming into this country that you and I want to buy to make them more expensive because we're trying to manage the economy. There is nothing more socialistic and big government-ish than Donald Trump's trade insanity. And Republicans under Reagan and Bush and everybody else were for freedom. Freedom. Our farmers should have the right to sell their products overseas with freedom. And you and I should be able to go to Walmart and buy stuff from China if we choose to, without huge taxes on us. And it's also terrible economics. So Republicans from Reagan on, from World War II on, Republicans were for free trade. And the whole world was moving towards free trade, passing agreements that bit by bit bring down tariffs. Now, the far left, the Bernie Sanders left, turned against trade a while ago and fought them on that, big time. Now, overnight, Republicans went from being passionately in favor of free trade to being ardent protectionists, because if they didn't, the base would turn against them. And it's because the base has become this nationalist, populist, protectionist, isolationist group. Let me try a cultural reference. I don't know if people get this. The Republican Party used to be Alex P. Keaton. Remember him, character from I can't remember his name, the actor played, kind of nerdy, tweedy, young guy, young Republican.
Michael J. Fox.
J. Fox played. That's who the Republican Party used to be. The Republican Party used to be Slade Gorton, kind of intellectual, pro-free trade, pro-economic growth. Now the Republican Party is Larry the Cable Guy, a reactionary, against everything MAGA hat wearing. And it's just stunning. It was stunning for me to see Republican members of Congress who had just the year before fought for free trade, fought for like the Trans-Pacific Partnership, giving Donald Trump a standing ovation when he announced that he was killing NAFTA. It's what can I say? I mean, the Republican Party has become a cult of personality, period.
Jenny?
We have a question about small business owners, and it's the essence of it to me seems a fear of more aggressive attacks by Democrats versus frustration with the Republicans. So there's problems to the right, problems to the left. What do you want to say to small business owners and how they can think about politics today?
I think they would have had a very legitimate reason to fear Bernie Sanders' version of the Democratic Party, which was anti-employer, anti-business, wanted to fight a very aggressive war against Wall Street, probably go way too far, against banks and others, and on healthcare. I think business owners should have been very afraid if Bernie Sanders was the nominee of the Democratic Party. But if you look at Joe Biden's record, and this is why the left really doesn't like him, I mean, on things like bankruptcy reform and other things, I mean, he was the senator from Delaware, which is where a lot of corporations have their headquarters, the insurance industry is there. He's been a Democrat, like our Democrats, like Patty Murray, like Maria Cantwell, who understood that you have to work with the business community on issues like trade and other things. I think small businesses are going to be a lot better off under a Biden administration than the Trump administration, especially if they are in any way tied to trade, which has just been a disaster for Republicans. And even if the economy was going pretty well before the pandemic, it's really been fueled artificially by massive infusions of deficit spending, which just can't go on forever. So again, I don't think small business people should fear a moderate Biden Democratic Party.
I think I see just one more, and it is 8:30, so we'll conclude with this. I just wanted to reiterate that PEG as a 501c3 is not supporting or opposing any particular candidate or candidates. I need to say that we made a declaration about that in the beginning. And with these questions, we're simply reading them off of what people were submitting. So the last question, and again, this is reading word for word. So person wants to know, how do we diminish the influence of Fox News?
That's a great question. By winning the election. I'm sorry, there's just really only one solution to everything. I mean, but you're really not going to do that. You're not going to diminish. This is the really terrifying and disappointing thing about America right now, is whether Trump wins or loses, there's a significant minority in this country. They're a minority, but they're a big minority. I don't know, 25, 30, 35% of American adults who agree with Trump. And when Trump leaves, they're going to look for the next Trump. They listen to all this stuff from Fox News, and they shake their heads because it's what they were already thinking. And they're not going away. Fox isn't going away. Rush Limbaugh might be very sick, but conservative talk radio is not going away. The thing is, though, they just can't be allowed to run the country. They can't. We have to make sure they don't win the election. Let them be the minority. Let Fox News spend all its time ranting about Biden as long as they don't win. I mean, that's really, I mean, that's the best we can hope for, I think. And I think that's, as of today, that's where we appear to be headed. But we'll see. It's a long way to the election.
Well, with that, I would like to express on behalf of PEG our gratitude, our sincere gratitude, Mr. Vance, for spending time with us this evening. We should have this video of the interview up on our website within a week or so. And for the audience and you, if you haven't visited our website, we invite you to do so. There are videos of several past forums available for your viewing. Thank you again, Chris Vance.
I am flattered that you asked me. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks,
Night,
Chris.
everybody.
Pleasure.